Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Welcome to Beyond the Matrix with Rod Bryant and Jerry Gordon. Here on Israel News Talk Radio. Unplug, strap yourself in, because you are about to move beyond the Matrix.
Welcome, Beyond the Matrix. All the people that are listening to us on Israel News Talk Radio, as well as YouTube. Thank you guys for watching it on YouTube and also making your comments. It really means a lot to Jerry and I. And we have a great show lined up for you today. Obviously, a guest that you've known and heard from in a while, but we want to try to give you a breakdown of some nuclear technology ideas about missiles, etc. Talk about the Middle East, and give you a little bit more, what would you call the technical, mechanical side of it, so you can begin to understand that when we hear someone like the President of the United States saying that they have developed this new whiz-bang weapon, and then Jerry, my producer, so adequately does some research and find out, whoa, we've had this same weapon for a long time. I don't know what it's called, tactical nuclear weapon. So Jerry and I are both asking ourselves a question and scratching our head. Okay, is there such a thing as a safe nuclear weapon? And I don't think there is, Jerry. We'll have this debate back and forth. But tell them about our guest.
Well, our guest is our usual expert on this stuff, Dr. Stephen Bryen. Stephen was a deputy undersecretary during the Reagan era in Washington, D.C. at the Pentagon, specializing in technology and security. He's a known military technologist. He's a font of information. He's critically incisive. And he even asked the question about, why do we need tactical nuclear weapons? If anything, it's going to cause people to use them, and that's not what we want to have happen. But he's also pretty smart about why suddenly the world is in love with Israel and the Middle East, and wonderful things are sort of breaking out, courtesy of work that the president had commissioned people to do. But the reality is, Israel is the strong horse in the area. Nobody comes close to it.
No, and you know what, Jerry? I said this in a couple other shows. It's amazing how much chaos is going on in the world, and yet at the same time, we're seeing some of the most amazing things happen between Israel and the Arab states, and a potential peace to come to that region that we've never seen before. So, guys, don't go away. You listen to Beyond the Matrix. I appreciate it. And if you're listening on YouTube or you want to watch on YouTube, go to Netiv, N-E-T-I-V, online, one word, and you'll be able to see us there. We'll be back to our first segment after these messages.
Israel is located in one of the most volatile areas in the world. Israel is an island of stability in a sea of war and unrest. In the midst of this turmoil, Israel stands out as a beacon of order and human progress. Each week we update you on what's happening in this, the Jewish state, a true light unto the nations. This is Jay Shapiro. Join me every Thursday on Israel News Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Beyond the Matrix, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
Thank you. You are in the first major segment of Beyond the Matrix. I'm Rod Bryant, along with Jerry Gordon, my amazing co-host, and Stephen Bryen, regular on the show. And we wanted to get a couple of updates on some news that Jerry and I had kind of broke in the introduction. So why don't we I'm going to toss it over to you, Jerry, and let you get rolling.
Yes, Steve, missile defense and nuclear weapons seems to be in the news these days, given a comment by President Trump about a certain nuclear powerful weapon. And that turns out to be what? A new warhead for the Triton submarine force, as I understand it.
Yes, it's a low-powered nuclear warhead. Yeah.
And question I guess we have to ask you is, while the president said this is a super terrific weapon, it deals with something called tactical nuclear threats.
Tactical nuclear threats.
Yeah. So the question is, what are tactical threats? And secondarily, what is this whiz-bang new warhead?
Well, first of all, you asked a really very important question. Maybe you didn't realize it, because nobody really knows what a tactical nuclear threat is, or for that matter, what a tactical nuclear weapon is. Presumably, it's a smaller yield weapon. But what's small?
Well,
where does smaller start and where does smaller end?
Yeah, that was going to be my follow-up question. How small is small?
Well, it's it's in the eyes of the beholder, I think, because there is no definition. There's no agreed formula. We have an airdropped bomb, nuclear bomb, which is called dial-a-yield, because you can dial up how big you want it to blow up. So you choose the size of it. Now, look, the military logic, which is kind of, well, how can I say? It's military logic. It's not necessarily human logic. Military logic is that somehow the nature of the target you're trying to hit will determine the size of the bomb you want to explode. So when is it tactical and when is it big? All of these are big. There's no such thing as a tactical nuclear weapon. It's all nonsense. If it's big enough to knock out a city, it's big.
Right.
And horrible.
So are you intimating that tactical nuke is not an accurate description?
Well, the Pentagon apparently believes that if an enemy, they usually think of the Russians, they don't think so much of the Chinese for peculiar reasons, but that the Russians somehow might, in a conflict, use a tactical nuclear weapon to try and solve a problem, and so if we have tactical nuclear weapons, they won't use their tactical nuclear weapons because we might solve their problem. That's the logic of it. I can't even foresee a circumstance like that, because once a nuclear weapon is unleashed, there's no limit to how many will be unleashed and where and what. It goes out of control. It's completely crazy. So I'm not a fan of so-called tactical nuclear weapons. I don't see what value they have. And I think it tends to make nuclear war more rather than less likely, which is a bad thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me ask you this. Normally the ICBM or the missile systems that they've been using, and they're going to retrofit with this, which I understood they've done this already. This has been done some time back, but that it's multiple warheads, correct? It can deliver multiple warheads.
These are going on submarines.
Okay.
Not on anything else.
Okay.
And then the airdrop weapon is a single weapon, but you got plenty of them on board.
Right.
And you're flying over enemy territory, I guess, with these weapons. I don't like to give anything to the military that they might use like this, because they might use it. It's just a very bad idea. Well,
speaking about that subject matter, let's switch over to Israel's ability to do the same thing, their ability to defend themselves, their umbrella from attack, say from Tehran or et cetera. What do you have an assessment on that?
Well, any kind of defense has to have an offensive side to it.
Correct.
If you're just going to try to put up a wall and say nobody's going to hit me, good luck. You're not going to win that fight. You have to have some threat that you can bring to the enemy. So Israel does have that. They've had for years Jericho missiles that are equipped with, assumed to be equipped with nuclear weapons. They used to have Phantoms, F-4 Phantoms, special nuclear version. I imagine they now have F-15s that do the same job. The F-35 is not likely to be used, doesn't carry enough load. And of course they have conventional submarines with nuclear torpedoes and other and missile launch capabilities. So they have a pretty good, let's call it a deterrent, but it's also means that they can bring the battle to the enemy if the enemy tries to bring the battle to them. There's a real problem of asymmetry. And I might as well bring this up now because it's a scary problem. And that is when you have an adversary that says, I'm much, much physically bigger. I have many more cities. I can afford to lose a third of my country against an Israel, which is a postage stamp by comparison in size.
Right.
And where one or two nuclear weapons would destroy the whole country and kill 7 or 8 million people. So that's the asymmetry that is very troublesome for Israel. And, they're doing their best to deal with that kind of potential threat. Now, Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons quite yet, but they're on the way. And this is getting to be kind of frightening, which raises, in turn, another terrific issue, which is an issue that came up in 1973, if you remember, before the Yom Kippur War, when a number of military people, encouraged the Prime Minister, Golda Meir, to preempt the Egyptians. They saw what was going on. And they said, we have to preempt it. We're going to be in this terrible war. She didn't want to do it because she was afraid of the reaction of Washington and the politics and stuff like that. And as a result, Israel lost a lot of lives it didn't need to lose. Well, the situation is a little different now. But what do? Do you wait until the missiles are actually, in the air? Because you can't kill them all. No system that can kill them all. And
you may recall there was a novel called The Last Israelis that was produced. And the scenario is about a Dolphin subcrew equipped with, as you said, both conventional and nuclear-headed cruise missiles on board. And they are the subject of a first strike, hypothetically, from Iran, which obviously knocks out a fair amount of people.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to wait for a first strike.
No, they're not at all.
I don't think they can. It's just a matter of logic. They can't.
Yeah, they just cannot.
That's why the Iranians are playing with fire, because Israel's not a threat to Iran from a military point of view on a daily basis. There's no threat. Israel has no missiles that are going to land in Iran. Doesn't have strategic missiles of that kind, which is a little point that keeps getting neglected. It's Iran that's building these missiles.
Right.
Israel doesn't have the equivalent of a Nodong-2 or these other systems that the Iranians are putting up. But they face the threat that if Iran is nuclear, they have to take it out. It's simple as that. Because Iran makes no bones about wanting to destroy the state of Israel.
So as much as you
said, diplomatic course of action under the current regime.
Yeah. As much as you said you don't think that tactical nuclear weapons is really a good idea.
Use a tactical one when
or just but I think you are also intimating that nuclear weapons in and of itself is just horrible, right? So what other alternative would you have? We almost don't have a choice. Israel nor the United States, right?
Well, that's an interesting question. There's two choices, or two options, I guess. And there's probably more than two, but I'll just mention two. The first one, of course, is that you use conventional means to destroy their missile capabilities. So you remove their missile threat. That's option one. For Israel, that's a fairly practical option. And for the U.S., to some extent, with the countries like Iran, it's a practical option. Now, when you get to Russia or China, it's not a practical option because there are just too many potential places they can launch from. They have hardened a lot of their sites, so it's very difficult to destroy them. So that may not work. So the second option is to try and destroy them on launch. Now, right now, we don't have that capability, because what President Reagan originally proposed, which was called the Strategic Defense Initiatives, or AKA Star Wars, the idea there was to have a system in space that not only could detect missile launches, actually we have that system, but that could destroy them before they got into space. We get them in the early phase of their launch. And that system was called Brilliant Pebbles. It was never built. Now, there's talk now about going back to something like that, not necessarily the same exact solution, but something quite similar to that. And I think some of the testing of these space vehicles that we see that are persistent, that stay in for a long time and all that, is part of the effort to get into that sort of posture. We can no longer use satellites because they can be shot down.
Right. So you're saying that maybe a little bit more ability to
space air.
Yeah. So being able to have space aircraft and a tactical deterrent. We got to go to a break, so we'll be back in just a minute. Hey guys, don't go away. We really appreciate you listening. You're listening to Beyond the Matrix here on Israel News Talk Radio.
The Tamar Yona Show.
Tamar? She's sassy.
She's smart.
She's funny.
But she's also a real Jewish mother.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tamar Yona. And yes, I can be all of those things. But at Israel News Talk Radio, I'm here to bring you the news stories and guests that you may not hear anywhere else. Join me live on air Sundays, Mondays, and Tuesdays for the most unique and bold talk radio in Israel.
The Tamar Yona Show.
The return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel was prophesied in the Bible thousands of years ago and is coming true today. Shalom. Join me, Josh Wander, on Israel Unplugged. Listen in as we delve into the spiritual and physical aspects of the Jewish return to Zion. We'll discuss the biblically mandated, historic, and of course practical understandings of this incredible transition from exile to redemption. That's Israel Unplugged, every Monday on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com.
Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Did you know this psalm and many others were composed by a Jewish shepherd and musician who later became a king? Would you like to know some of the inner meanings of Psalms to help you connect with God and strengthen your soul? An exciting and easy-to-read book is now available which will help you do just that. Software for the Soul, Psalms for Everyone, available on Kindle, Audible, and Amazon.com. Software for the Soul.
Modesty at the beach? It isn't just about body image. It's about feeling good. Modest swimsuits, so we don't get burned by the sun.
So we won't get ogled by strangers.
So we'll feel free to express ourselves without the need to expose ourselves.
Let Marcy Modest help you to cover up what you want, how you want.
Made in Israel.
Visit marcymodest.com. That's MARSEA modest.com.
And get a 10% discount on your first purchase.
Welcome back to Beyond the Matrix, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
And we are back. It is segment 2 of Beyond the Matrix. Rod Bryant here along with Jerry Gordon and Stephen Bryen. We're talking about the supposed to be the new and improved weapon system that the President of the United States was bragging on, saying that this is going to be the next thing best to sliced bread. But we've been talking, not really sure if it's anything really new, correct, Steve? So let's. I just want to ask about, why don't you, Jerry, go ahead and ask it? You asked it in the break.
Yeah, we've got a whole bunch of land-based missiles and silos in the middle part of the United States. How vulnerable are they to, let's say, a salvo from the Russians or the Chinese?
Well, we don't know anything really about the accuracy of Chinese missiles, so that's
true.
Because they haven't shown us that, so it's anybody's guess. The real question about silos, and the Russians have the same question that our guys have, to be honest, is what does it take to knock out a silo?
Mm-hmm.
How invulnerable is the silo? And the terminology of the missile strikes, first strike, second, whatever you want to talk about, hitting missile fields and knocking them out, is how much overpressure can be put on top of the silo,
right,
to destroy what's underneath it, what's down in the tube. And that is that's something that I guess the Pentagon, and I'm sure the Kremlin and all the others, have studied intensively in terms of how they design these things and what they think they can do. And it also depends a great deal on the accuracy of the other guy's missiles. How accurately can he put it within X distance from that silo to make it effective? And this is I don't want to call that science exactly, because it isn't. It's speculation, because there's a lot of factors that enter into it. You may have a very accurate missile and a windy day.
Right.
So that the wind blows it off target. So the great worry between Russia and the U.S., and this is, there's more to it now with China, but the real worry was, would either side have a first strike capability?
Yep.
And if you had a first strike capability, would he use it? You know, take out the enemy, he's gone. That's it. No more problem. So there was always a feeling in the United States, and I imagine the Russians had the same one, that the Russians were cheating and they're trying to find a way to have a first strike capability. By the way, still, that's worry is still there. And the Russians vice versa, right? So that's what informed that process. Now we have China with not a lot of nuclear missiles, but it's growing in number. The latest Pentagon report says 300, maybe 300 intercontinental ballistic missiles. Is that a threat to our missile capabilities? You know, are we programmed to deal with a Chinese threat? These are questions we really don't have very good answers to today. But China is not involved in any arms control agreements. There hasn't been any attempt to rationalize the relationship in terms of nuclear between the U.S. and China. China's building more ballistic missile submarines. And by the way, that's the other way to make a first strike not so good, because you can have we have what we call a nuclear triad. So missiles in silos is one part of it, but only one. Then we have nuclear bombers. You know, we have B-1s, B-2s, B-52s. So those, and even other aircraft that can carry a nuclear weapon, like F-16s can. And then we have the underwater, you know, the submarines, the called boomers, the ballistic missile submarines, which can be very hard to find, let alone, you know, do something about that kind of threat. And the Russians have the same. Now the Chinese are building more of those, so they're going to have the same.
So let me ask a question here, Stephen. Look, it's obvious that a first strike is almost going to be useless against us, for example. Let me say 300 missiles. And when we have multiple platforms that could be sent from all parts of the world to attack them, wouldn't the first strike capability be just kind of like forget about it?
Didn't say they had a first strike. China.
No, I'm just saying if they had a first strike capability.
Well, not with that.
Oh, yeah.
They don't have enough. I mean, no one perceives it.
Okay.
As a first strike, because whatever they do, enough of our stuff would survive for them to be clobbered.
Because we have that capability to deliver nuclear weapons from all different kinds of countries, right?
We're
right.
So, yeah, I don't see that as the particular issue with China at the present time, but it is certainly an issue with Russia. That hasn't changed. Although today, I don't see the Russians actively. I think they're trying to be a pain in the butt, but I don't know that they have a capability, first strike capability any longer, or if they ever had it.
Yeah. Jerry, go ahead.
How effective is this sub-based second strike capability that we have, particularly the Trident sub-forces?
I think it's very effective. I mean, I think it's always been very effective. I imagine that that's the wild card in any nuclear equation, because unless you can track the submarines accurately and know where they are, and our submarines are extremely quiet.
Explain to them the reason why is because they're nuclear.
That's not the only reason why. It's part of it, for sure. I mean, look, a diesel electric submarine, which is a conventional submarine, running on battery, you're not going to find it either. Okay?
Okay, I understand the design as well, yeah.
Yeah, but it's all the equipment, machinery, the sounds, the sound suppression, the vibration suppression, the cavitation suppression. All these things are part of an equation that makes these very stealthy. Submarine has always been called the silent service, because you can't find them hidden.
Right.
But these are particularly effective, particularly in deep water. Although the limit of depth that a submarine can go is not that great, it's still great enough to make it very hard to detect them. In the China area in the Pacific. It depends where you are. Some of it's extremely deep, but some of it, like the Taiwan Straits, the South China Sea, are fairly shallow. So it'd be harder to hide submarines there. But in any case, it's a very effective deterrent, and it's something that the U.S. has invested heavily in, and it's been very successful so far as I know.
Steve, turning to Israel, how is its sub force rated in terms of its capabilities?
Well, it's a diesel electric with the newest ones with what's called the AI
air
independent propulsion.
Yep.
It means it can stay down longer without relying on its diesel engine, because AIP is a hydrogen-based system that you carry with you. You don't need to surface to get air or use a snorkel to get air. So you're very undetectable from that point of view. Nuclear subs don't need to either because they're nuclear. So I think it's good from that point of view. And of course, those submarines are all built in Germany.
Yep.
But with many modifications. They're based on the 209 pattern or model, but they have a very different sail that came from the Netherlands, and they're quite a different design in that respect. And they've been modified so that they can also support SEAL activity,
correct,
swimmer activity, and they've been modified to carry some kinds of weapons that we don't talk about. So, in other words, they're pretty dangerous machines, and the Israelis are it's an important part of their deterrent.
And is that a deterrent force they can use in the context of an action from Iran?
Yep, that's what it's for.
Okay. And does that mean that they're in normal patrols along the commercial sea lanes?
They haven't sent me any information on their patrols.
Just pick up the phone and call. I'm not waiting.
Where are you going today? I imagine that whatever they do, they do. I know they've been active in the Red Sea because there's been talk about that, but beyond that, I can't say because I don't know.
I heard something this weekend that's kind of interesting. I guess the Israelis underneath the table have been trying to do something with Sudan in terms of normalization. And in this discussion, which I partially privileged, it was my understanding that one of their interests is to take over Port Sudan.
Interesting.
Really?
Yes.
Wow. That would be a brilliant move, I'm telling you.
Well, it'd be a brilliant move and ironic because it was Iran who was shipping in missiles to eventually get to you-know-where. And here would be Israel sort of taking this over and dealing with it.
Well, the whole geostrategic map of the Middle East is under huge change.
Oh, yeah,
big
absolutely.
I was involved with the Egyptian one back in the 70s. Very much involved. In fact, I wrote the first paper for my bosses on the Foreign Relations Committee that this was coming in 75. Took till 77. But I had met with the Egyptian generals, and they told me it was coming. As simple as that. Wasn't any brilliant thought on my part. And they said, look, we don't want any more wars with Israel. We want to settle this issue and be done with it.
So was that the backstory for what happened at Camp David with Begin and the late Egyptian leader?
Anwar Sadat. Yeah. Yes, that's part of the backstory. Yes, for sure.
We're gonna have to go to a break, guys. So everybody, stick around. Appreciate the people watching us on YouTube at Nativ NETIV online. Really appreciate that. We'll be back for the third and final segment, picking up the conversation with Stephen Bryen and Jerry Gordon and myself. So go away.
In a time where feelings have become fact, where rational thought and common sense has disappeared, one man stands above it all.
I'm Howie Sobaker, your political hitman.
Local Hit Band airs every Tuesday at 11:59 p.m. North American time, 7 a.m. Israeli time, only on Israel News Talk Radio.
Are you interested in transforming your life, drawing closer to the Creator, and uncovering the deeper meanings and hidden treasures in the Hebrew Bible?
Then join me, Rav Yitzhak Michelson,
and me, William Hall,
on The Science of Kabbalah, where we are seeking to narrow the gap between what we understand of our physical and spiritual worlds. So make sure to tune in every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Israel time, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Beyond the Matrix, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
We're in the final segment. Rod Bryant, along with Jerry Gordon and Stephen Bryen, and we have been discussing a little bit of everything. Everything from tactical nuclear weapons to the ICBM to Israel's second strike capacity or capability. And I have no clue where you want to go next, Jerry.
Well, that's before you go anywhere. I didn't say it was a second strike capacity.
I think that was the question that we asked.
Yeah, maybe in a question.
Yeah, it was a question. You didn't say that. No, it was a question.
I don't think it is.
Right. Yeah. So
you think, pardon me for raising that question again, Steve, you think that, for example, the Dolphin subs are really a first strike capability?
I think the Jericho missiles are.
All right.
Okay. So I'm not at all convinced that these are second strike, and I don't think the Israelis would want them to be seen as second strike. They're not going to absorb it. We already talked about it.
Can't afford to absorb.
They can't afford it.
Right.
So they're going to have to preempt. I'm absolutely convinced of that.
Good clarity. Thanks. I really appreciate that.
Sorry about
that.
No. I really appreciate you bringing that up because I don't want that to be misunderstood.
But, thinking about something we discussed during the break, maybe you should talk about how realistic is Iran having, quote, enhanced long-range missiles at this point in time? And specifically, are they anywhere near the capability of miniaturizing warheads or shields or anything of that sort?
Why don't you ask them? Why are you asking me? I don't know.
Because you're supposed to know.
Nobody knows.
You're supposed to know everything. That's why.
Yeah, right. Look, first of all, when they say so, they have something doesn't mean they have something. Okay? They say a lot of stuff. Just like the Chinese say a lot of stuff. You have to really find out whether it's real or not. So that's point one. Point two is the pictures that were shown of this missile, they're way too small for a nuclear weapon. Okay? They don't have the carrying capacity for a warhead of any size. And even if the Iranians turn out to be extremely good at making nuclear warheads, which I doubt, they're heavy. And, they take up space in their weight. So you need a big missile. Now, the question is, how close are they to having such a warhead? Nobody knows because they haven't demonstrated, tested, or shown anything like that. And I imagine these latest problems they've had in some of their enrichment facilities and other parts of their infrastructure that are related to attempts to develop a nuclear capability suggest that some people are trying their very best to make sure they don't get there. I don't know who those people are.
Yeah, I was going to say, are some of those people possibly insiders or no?
Could be. Yeah. Nobody knows. There could be
it just
insiders.
Seems maddening.
There could be insiders working with outsiders.
Right.
There could be outsiders working with insiders. There could be outsiders working with nobody. We don't know. There's no ground truth on this because nobody knows. And no one has given any credible information that would, other than the fact that they were extraordinarily clever attacks, which says there's been a lot of planning. Something was worked out very well. They were able to penetrate whatever security was around these places without very much difficulty and take care of the problem that they wanted to take care of.
And for the listener, let's remind them which time period are we talking about? And when was it? This was just about, a month and a half ago?
A month and a half ago, yeah. I think that's right. Yeah, I didn't put the exact dates down.
Yeah, it was about a month and a half ago, and there were several attacks.
It went over a couple of weeks, so it's not just one. It was a series.
And honestly, we don't know who did it.
Enrichment facilities.
At this point, no one's definitively said who did it. correct?
No one has claimed that they did it.
Right.
And no one has said, even the Iranians haven't figured it out.
So the funny thing is, when you talked about how they say they can do X, Y, Z, my reason for doubting it is because they're having to tell us all the time that they are doing this. I kind of wonder, if you have to tell your enemies all the time what you are doing, at some level, maybe you're bloviating. I don't know. That's how I feel.
Well, I think the Iranians are scared.
Of course.
Because now with the normalization with Israel, first of all, puts Israel a lot closer to Iran than they were before.
This has got to have them shaking in their boots.
And then the Israelis are talking with the UAE about a joint base on an island, looking toward Iran.
Right.
Now, what's going to be on that island, I don't know, but I could guess. Starts with an A, ends with a W, has an R and an O in the middle, something like that. No, I mean, it's going to be a missile defense island, yes? Then maybe with a runway so they can run strike operations. I mean, there could be a lot of things there. So, I think the Iranians are, they've been playing one-sided poker for quite a while.
Right.
Nobody could do anything about it. The Houthis are shooting off. Can you imagine Houthis shooting off rockets at Saudi Arabia and the Saudi Arabians basically getting squashed?
Right.
I mean, that's got to stop, right? So, I mean, basically, I think bringing Israel into the game gives these guys the possibility of stopping those kinds of threats. And it also puts the Iranians on notice that they could be part of being stopped. And they may not like it very much. In fact, they don't like it.
No,
so they're busy trying to show. They just did a military exercise in the Gulf with their little boats.
Oh yeah.
And they put out a story that we had to pull out our UAVs out of there because they might shoot them down. A lot of nonsense. But I mean, it's part of the game that tells you that they're worried, they're frightened. They had 2 weeks of incidents that were very damaging to their programs. That they don't know how it happened, why it happened, who did it. I mean, they can guess, but they have no proof. They don't even know how it happened. So this is a very interesting moment, I think. Very interesting moment. And I hope that particularly the Saudis, now understand that they have to make their move now. They can't wait any longer, because if they don't make their move now, then the whole thing will not work and they won't have the deterrence that they really need.
So are you suggesting possible that the domino effect that Jerry and I were talking about last week could happen much more swifter than...
I think so. It has to. Yeah. Because once you start this in motion, you have to finish the job or it will disintegrate.
Right.
Okay. And then you don't get anything. You get an embassy in your country. So what?
Right.
I mean, what you really want out of this is deterrence. This is what the UAE wants. This is what the Kuwaitis want, and all these guys want, and especially the Saudis. They have to have it. The U.S. can't supply it.
So basically, what you're really saying, Steve, is that Israel is the strong horse militarily in the Middle East.
Regionally, yes.
Yes.
Yeah. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah. They have to be. Yeah.
Well, first of all, they're the only nuclear power in the Middle East.
That's true.
So you start there. Secondly, they have the best air force in the Middle East, bar none. Right. So that's very important. Thirdly, they have exquisitely good intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
I think they've worked hard on for many years. Now, a lot of it's looking at terrorism and things like that, but some of it's strategic. And they know what they're doing. I mean, just to go back a year, was it a year ago or two now, when the Israelis liberated all the nuclear documents from Iran.
The archives in the warehouse.
From Tehran. Mm-hmm. Right? They walked away with them.
Right.
I always wonder how the hell they got them out of the country. I mean, you need a U-Haul.
Well, I cannot wait until that one's declassified.
You won't be. But, I mean, it's the kind of thing that, it's chutzpah, of course, but it's also the kind of thing that shows how good they are, what they do.
Right.
And they have to be. And so that's very important to these other countries. They don't have that skill base. They have some, but not as much as the Israelis.
So really, you're saying that the intelligence capability is probably the very glue that holds everything else together. The defense capabilities, the first strike, whatever. Without great intelligence, all those great technologies are not going to help you too much.
Yeah, I think intelligence is a really big part of the equation.
Well, speaking about that, it's apparent that the current Mossad chief had been the leading factor in the negotiations leading to, for example, the UAE normalization. And I assume that's true with Bahrain.
Well, I think the president of the United States had something to do with it too. Look, there were times not very long ago when presidents would have been completely against it.
Yep. As a matter of fact, the last
Republicans and Democrats.
Absolutely, I was getting ready to say the last dozen.
Right, all of them.
Yeah.
So I mean, this is a remarkable achievement by President Trump. It's really big because it changes the whole matrix, to use your term, of the Middle East. It's a huge thing. The first time an American president actually sided with Israel and the Arabs against Iran, in real terms, no BS. There it is. It's really a remarkable achievement. I take my hat off, if I had one, to the president, to Kushner, who did a lot of the legwork on this thing and was very effective. It's a great achievement. Tomorrow they'll sign the first of the series, the UAE agreement in Washington.
I find it interesting. We're coming in close to closing time. I find it interesting that in the time of such great chaos around the world, COVID, you name it, protests, et cetera, we have behind the scenes this amazing peace deal that's taking place, or cooperation, or whatever you want to call it. And, obviously I don't know that we'll all be singing Kumbaya with Arab states, but at the same time, this is historic to the limit, unbelievable historic.
Extremely important. It's redrawing the map of geopolitical.
Yes. And God willing,
it can't be left unfinished.
Right, and God willing, it'll bring us a lasting peace in the region.
If it's finished and they all sign up, which I think they will probably, then I think the threat in the Middle East goes down quite a lot. I think the Iranians have to start to pay attention and make some deals.
Okay, guys. Stephen, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. And until next week at the same time, we'll see you guys later. Shalom, shalom.
Where can you get the inside news on Israel? At Israel News Talk Radio, we're dedicated to sharing Israel's inside story with the world by providing our listeners with news on Israeli politics, current affairs, and Israeli Jewish culture. The Israel News Talk Radio homepage also provides you, the listener, with useful information at your fingertips, with scrolling news headlines, weather, currency exchange, Shabbat candlelighting times, and so much more. Our radio programming is always accessible and on demand. We operate absolutely free of charge for everyone, everywhere. If you love what we do, partner with us now by becoming an Israel News Talk Radio supporter. With your support, you'll be inscribed on our Israel News Talk Radio Wall of Fame. There's nothing like us in the world. Be part of something great. Israel News Talk Radio. Straight talk from Israel.
Howdy, this is Rita from League City, Texas, now living in Israel. And though my heart may have belonged to Texas, it now belongs to Israel and all the fantastic show hosts at Israel News Talk Radio.
Hi, this is Michael Solomon from Kiryat Arba, Israel. And why do I love listening to Israel News Talk Radio? Because I love listening to the interesting interviews they do and their news reporting that most other media sources don't cover.
Hey, this is Nicoleko from Malmö, Sweden. It gets pretty cold here in Sweden, so I love cuddling up with a warm cup of tea while I listen to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hey everybody, this is Frank Morris from Tennessee. Me and my dog Buster really love listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.